Welcome back to the Chat X podcast. Today we have a special episode for you guys. They're all special episodes, but this one I feel like it's going to be a little extra special. Today we really only have one topic we're going to focus on, but it reaches out and impacts a few different policies and just things that are going on around the world. And that is, of course, the deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He is a man who was a Salvadoran national and citizen. He immigrated to the U.S. at the age of 16. It was undocumented immigration, and he has since married a U.S. citizen, had children with her, and established a life, and received a work permit authorizing him to stay within the U.S. He was recently deported by ICE and the Trump administration to El Salvador to stay in the prison made by the leader of El Salvador, Bukele, for gang members. In 2019, he was alleged to be a member of MS-13 by a police informant in Baltimore and the D.C. area, so in the area around the DMV and Baltimore, where he resides. He was alleged to be a member of a faction of MS-13 that originated in New York City along the East Coast. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there, and he and his lawyers have claimed that he has continuously denied being a member of the gang. The court records do show that he denied any participation in a criminal organization. And one of the reasons he was allowed to get a work permit and stay in the U.S. is that he was filing to be a refugee, as there was a gang in his hometown in El Salvador which was threatening to kill himself and members of his family. So he was applying for asylum status due to those reasons. He was deported by the Trump administration, and there have been several court rulings on it, most recently one from the Supreme Court, saying that he did not receive due process in his deportation and he has to come back to the U.S. Donald Trump has said that he has no intention of doing that, and he has no ability to do it, as the president of El Salvador does not want to send this man back. He wants to keep him in prison. The president of El Salvador, Bukele, said he doesn't have the power to do it. It's outside of his authority now that man lives inside of the prison that they've set up. And it's getting a lot of comparisons to certain events that happened in the early 20th century in Italy and Germany. The rise of fascism, they're saying the death of democracy is here, 2025. The death knell has finally been dealt. There's nothing else to recover from. I'm not quite sure we're there yet, but this is an interesting series of events that has occurred, and it will have dramatic impacts on the world. As of right now, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is still in El Salvador and is still listed as being in the prison. I have my own personal doubts as to whether or not he's still alive inside that location, but that is his currently listed location. The official ruling by the Supreme Court was that he has to be brought back, and the Trump administration and the president of El Salvador, his close ally Bukele, have said that they have no interest in bringing him back. Anything I missed, Ferris, that you think I should add on?
You covered everything that was necessarily needed regarding to this topic. So
Got it. So if we have
I
good
think you
coverage,
did good.
thank you, appreciate that. So if we got good coverage of the background, let's go ahead and start off with your thoughts on how this is going to affect the world. More specifically, how do you think this is going to affect democracy in the U.S.? How is this going to affect the Trump administration during his term? We're only 3 months into the term. That's a thing people kind of forget about, but it's been exactly 90 days as of the time of recording of the Trump administration being in the White House. And we've seen a lot of stuff go on, and this might be the biggest event yet, in my personal opinion. Your thoughts, Ferris?
I think it's gonna be a very interesting 4 years, and I think right now what we see in the last 3 months, it's very odd. I'd say I can see the shift officially full on authoritarianism by this administration, and it goes through a lot more. Like like what's happening right now, and if they don't agree or they don't bring this guy back and follow the courts, that's part of the checks and balances system right there. That's what makes the United States so unique. Uh, if they don't bring this guy back and Trump does full blown authoritarianism like that, I think we're shifting to an America that we won't know ever again, regarding to like how one man kind of just takes over the U.S. and it becomes a full fledged dictator. Because it seems like we're shifting towards that way. Um, it's
Yeah.
a bad precedent that's been happening.
Yeah.
That's right now. If they don't bring him back, it's a very very bad precedent. Uh, just like I just want to bring up a little quick one with Mahmoud Khalil's case. That's setting, if if they officially deport him, because I don't think they officially deported him, because it doesn't make sense with the Louisiana judge. But if they officially deport him, that right there, it's gonna set a really bad precedent that, oh, even green card holders who are married to U.S. citizens can get deported. That is like they could find a way to use that towards anybody and find a way to kind of like um
Apply
to kind of
pressure.
like apply pressure, or just if they don't like somebody, they can just get them out of the country. Prime
Right.
examples that he even talked about in the yesterday's interview with meeting with Bukele, Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, was he was caught saying like to him, potentially putting the worst of American citizens in those prisons too.
He said the homegrown ones are
Wh-
next.
Yes. So that right there, how I see it is like he might actually just target like first he's gonna try to say, oh, let's get the worst of the worst, right?
The
And then I
terrorists,
think what's gonna go terrorists, right? And then the next stop after that is he's gonna. I think it's gonna be like political prisoners, in my opinion.
for sure. Lock her up, Hillary Clinton. Crooked Hillary.
Yep, exactly, exactly. So I think something like that's gonna happen. And if they allow this, I'll be honest with you. I think Chad, it's gonna. We'll see by the end of this his 4 years. We still got a long time, but we'll see in his end of his 4 years, and we'll see what's gonna happen. If he tries to run for a third term, which he is very insinuating it, and people are allowing that to happen, and he somehow becomes that,
It's over.
this it's over. It's over. It's time. I think I saw another thing, a news thing that said, news reports that said, I think two or three of the top professors in the country that teach fascism has fled the country already.
Yeah, a lot of that's been
So
going on, especially
yeah.
because it's in the news that he's currently having a dispute with Harvard as well. So back to Mahmoud Khalil, he was a student, student activist. Harvard is having an issue because Donald Trump wants them to, first of all, reject any students coming in from foreign countries who have ever posted anything critical of Israel, and also to
Mhm.
allow his ICE department to deport any students who are foreign nationals that have been critical of Israel. So he's sort of in a legal battle right now. He's threatening to withhold all their grants. I think it's about $9 billion in total that Harvard receives from the
Mhm.
U.S. government, and he's saying they're not going to receive a penny more if they don't, give into his will and do what he wants them to do with these foreign-born students. So we're definitely seeing, with Mahmoud Khalil and people like that, the student activist or somebody he's coming down very hard on. Somebody, they're a group that pretty much every administration that's really has deep ties to Israel, which is most of the American politicians, they've all sort of cracked down hard on the student protest for some reason. It's the one group there especially eager to target. Colombia famously had a lot of stuff going on. They had encampments. They had students get kicked out. They had students who were harassed. It was just overall a mess over there with everything that was going on. But now it's hitting Harvard. A lot of these premier, big name Ivy League institutions seem to be the target of his ire as of right now. He's also telling them they have to scrap all DEI programming and change how they admit students in general with no race based considerations involved. They've already struck down affirmative action in the Supreme Court, but some colleges, especially private colleges like Harvard, have the ability to still factor in, disadvantaged students of different reasons they may have faced challenges in life in their admissions process. So we're seeing a lot of stuff going on the collegiate end, and then on the the non-collegiate, just I would say average working class person end, we're seeing what's going on with Kilmar Brito Garcia. He's been having a real issue, trying to get back, and I think he's probably having an issue trying to stay alive. He's one of two things is true here. Either his story or their story. So either he is a gang member that they put in a prison full of other gang members who probably, have issues with him for being part of the gang, or he's somebody who filed refugee status because he was being threatened by gang members in his hometown from one of the second largest gang in El Salvador. So either way, he's known to have issues with gang members, and they put him in the prison full of gang members, and now they're not bringing him out. And I think one of the reasons they might not be bringing him out is that he's just not alive anymore. A lot of people I've been seeing have been comparing this to the situation in Germany with Auschwitz. Auschwitz was not in Germany. A lot of people think because it's the most famous concentration camp, it must have been in the heart of the German Empire, and that's where they were sending them to. Auschwitz is in Poland. A lot of our more educated listeners may have already known that, but the average person, I think, maybe thinks of Auschwitz as connected to Germany when actually it was in another nation. This was somewhere that the Jews of Germany were deported to. They were forced out of the country. So people saying, "Oh, Trump is putting, people he doesn't like, the undesirables of America, undocumented immigrants, students who are getting their immigration status revoked for supporting Israel. I'm sorry, for protesting against Israel. These people are being deported to another country which has close ties to the leader of the United States, and they're being put into one of the most overcrowded, harshest prison camps they can be put in." And some people are saying, well, if we see, Kilmar, Mr. Garcia die in this camp, it's a pretty good chance that people are going to start comparing this to an extermination camp as opposed to just an internment camp. Which, I mean, if we get a certain number of deaths in these camps, in these prisons that are being built in El Salvador, where people are just being forced to and sent, and especially if we get American citizens sent to those places who end up dead, I think extermination camp might be an accurate comparison. Your thoughts, Ferris?
No, I think you're 1000 right. Again, like I was saying, it's gonna be a bad precedent. These camps that are, it's very weird. It's kind of scary how like some sort of history is repeating itself scenario that we're living in. Um, we're talking about a guy that's literally planning to make, like you said, camps, right? He's building prison systems. He wants, well, he wants, his goal is to not have the US have him. He wants to put it in a foreign country where they can do whatever the hell they want, especially El Salvador, which he's doing it he's doing whatever the hell he wants. He doesn't care, you know. But you putting the weird part is like you're planning to put US citizens there. Hell, even green card holders shouldn't be there. No, none of our citizens or none of the people that, it's that's not how it should be. Can we even remember, like, he took the illegal Venezuelans in the US and threw them up because Venezuela doesn't want him. He took them to El Salvador and they locked him up. He's
Correct.
paying them like what?
I think it's
Forgot
$6
how
million
much it
dollars
was.
a month or something like that. It's an amount like that.
Yeah, something like that. I'm like, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. We live in a we're living right now in a very dangerous time where, like, I think the epitome of the democracy slash, well, the Constitution is being attacked. So the freedom of speech, that's being attacked right now, big time. You know, uh, I think I think because he's even going after freedom of speech. So like anybody that's that's
Protesting
like
Israel.
protesting Israel, going against Israel, and he's saying they're trying to twist the words and say they're going against America,
Yep. They
which
get
makes it like they're trying to use that. So like, okay, so from what I understood, since the founding fathers, anybody that moved to the United States, this is anybody that steps foot on U.S. soil, basically, should be able to have their constitutional rights. You know what I'm saying? Everybody got to follow the law of the land. That's one of the laws of the land. It's called the Constitution, right?
absolutely.
So saying that if they're following the laws of the land and then they're actually using the laws of the land, which is like protesting, whatever, or if they want to like speak their mind freely, and you can't even do that. That's not the U.S. then anymore. That's 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 not the United States anymore. So
As it was
I think,
established in 1776, for sure.
yeah. So I think, I'll be honest with you. I've said this a long time ago. If the founding fathers seen this, even so, I'm saying they're not the best people, of course. But I'm saying if they saw what happened to the United States now, they would hate it, especially the first president, George Washington, because he wanted two things. He didn't want people to have party systems because he knew it would divide the country, which it has. And he didn't. It didn't him seeing like the people not following the Constitution, or like how the way the government or the country looks like right now. It's crazy, man. It's just crazy.
Yeah, we're supposed to be a country ruled by laws, not by men. That's a famous saying people have said that, the
Yeah.
rules apply to everybody universally and fairly. The idea of Miranda rights in general. I believe the person who the Miranda rights are named after, the original caseholder, was not a U.S. citizen. He also was a terrible person, I'll be completely honest. When you actually look into the origin of why Miranda rights have to be read and why that's a law, He wasn't a good guy. He was a sexual offender. He did a lot of crazy, evil, nasty stuff. But the idea that you should have to be, you should have to be made aware of your rights if you're not already aware of them, and you think, he thought he was going to be tortured by the police if he didn't just confess to them. I think that's a good thing, and I think that's entirely in line with the Constitution, and the Supreme Court decided it was, and that's why we have those laws on the books. So, because we have laws on the books like that, and we have the idea of separation of powers and due process and things of that nature that are currently looking as if they're under attack, it does bring into question the sanctity of the American idea, the idea of this nation as one with certain sets of laws, certain sets of standards, and certain balances put in place so that no one man can ever have a certain amount of power that's above that. There's a lot of people that would argue that we've already passed that point a long time ago, that the wealthy have manipulated the laws and gotten certain things passed and used lobbying to influence things in a way that violates that grand spirit, but I personally don't think we've ever seen any attacks as severe as the ones we're seeing right now under the Donald Trump administration. We're really at a turning point, and Farris said by the end of his administration, we'll know, especially if he decides to run for a third term. I think we're going to know by the end of this year whether we've truly arrived under an authoritarian leader, a strong man, more South American style than traditionally the North American style. Historically,
Yep.
it's
You know what's the sad thing about this, Chad? The fact, like, let's say he goes full blown authoritarian and next election cycle comes and he does run for a third term. No one's gonna the other side of the spectrum, which is more like left in the center, they're not gonna do shit because they're comfortable with they're absolutely comfortable uh what the way of life is right now. They
yeah.
won't care. They won't fight back. They're not gonna just do a civil war because they're scared. They're not only scared, they're weak. They don't care. They're too comfortable with life the way it is.
They
So
are
that's the
comfortable.
sad thing about it. And all they're gonna do is complain and complain online and stuff like that. But they won't do what's necessary. They won't.
No, we're not going to see any South Korean stuff where the South Koreans they rushed into the parliament when their president tried to take over and declare martial law. We're not going to see anything like that from our Congress, I don't think. Especially because at the end of the day, we have to be honest. There are probably certain members of Congress right now who would be happy with an authoritarian government. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State currently, who Donald Trump chose to be his Secretary of State, was considered a pretty bog standard Republican. You know what I mean? He's kind of
Hmm?
just what a standard conservative Republican senator, congressman, whatever is in this country at this point. He was just a guy, had conservative values,
Yep.
voted in line with the party. He was the least controversial. He put RFK Jr. on there. People thought he was crazy. Tulsi Gabbard, people thought she's a psycho. Marco Rubio was the one everybody thought was just going to be like, oh yeah, this is a standard Republican. We'll put him on your cabinet, no issue. He got confirmed by Congress super easily.
Yep.
He's since become, a lot of people are pointing out, one of the most authoritarian leaning members of Trump's cabinet. He's the one who's saying things such as the Supreme Court has no authority over a president's foreign policy decisions, which is what he's describing the Kilmar Alberto Garcia decision as, a foreign policy decision to deport a terrorist. They're
Yeah.
labeling this man a terrorist specifically. Donald Trump did
Yep.
label MS-13 as a terrorist organization earlier this year so that he could use that sort of to expedite the process of deportations, anybody who's an MS-13 member. But if we see those allegations thrown at pretty much anybody from El Salvador, Guatemala, southern Mexico, the Central American region where MS-13 originates from, we could see a lot of people who would have access to due process somewhat lose that, especially if this court case, if it holds up, because this man, once again, Kilmer Alberto Garcia was never convicted by a jury, or really even he never even went to trial for any of these things of gang member affiliation. He was arrested, and there was a man who was a reliable informant for the police who accused him of being a member of a gang. But he continually denied that. His lawyers continually denied that, and him being listed as a gang member was just a formality on the case notes, not ever an actual label or conviction, or you know what I mean. He was never indicted in any cases related to gang activity. So the idea of labeling him a terrorist just because one person, one informant said he was, that could be really really risky and really dangerous. If you can find any one person willing to call any other person in America a terrorist at this point, to be honest, Like I don't think there's a single person out there that everybody be like, no, he's not a terrorist. You could call Obama or Joe Biden a terrorist. Somebody out there who's a reliable witness, a congressional whatever, a government employee would be very willing to level those allegations. And if we reach a point where once you have a terrorism allegations on your name, you can be disappeared and nothing will happen to you. I mean, we sort of already became that way post 9/11, post the Patriot Act, with the establishment of
Mhm.
Guantanamo Bay. But it never came home to roost with people who were either citizens or residents of the United States, which Kim Alberto Garcia was, and which Mahmoud Khalil was. So we're seeing it get closer and closer to affecting every single person in the U.S. Whereas before it only affected people in other countries who had terrorism allegations leveled against them. We're seeing sort of the long shadow cast by the Patriot Act continue to just impact everyday policy. And I mean, that may have been the greatest example of government overreach. That may have been the moment where your civil liberties, your absolute freedom as a person in this world may have been lost to the government. But we're seeing it encroach further and further. It's not just NSA watching your emails anymore. It's a lot more than that. It might be ICE knocking at your doors, CIA knocking at your doors. Somebody coming in saying, "Hey, but you put this hood on, or you're going to a camp." Something that's
Yep.
previously not been something American citizens had to deal with. Your thoughts, Ferris?
No, dude, like you said it perfect, man. Let me just be honest with you. You said it really well. Again, it's gonna be like how the beginning of the United States happened, like before Civil War, not Civil War, before the American Revolution, during the Revolution. You remember how they used to teach us about the British used to come knock on people's door and stay at their house, stuff like that, forcefully.
Forced quartering.
Yes. So it's kind of like reminds me of that a little bit, them knocking on the doors and stuff like that, being able to find somebody, or just kind of like Nazi Germany, you know. Uh, but I think it's just crazy that what we're seeing. And the funny part about this, Chad, glad you brought up Rubio in this podcast, because the funny part about I live in the state that he was senator for, oh, probably over a decade now. Yeah, he was over a decade as senator for Florida. So I remember when he first went ran, and I'm like, I won't lie, Chad, I was not surprised.
You were not surprised that he was running or that
Dude, I'll
he.
tell you why. And the Floridians, there's that the way he is. Think about it. Think about it. Florida, the Florida Cubans have a
Correct.
reputation.
The
So
the
I
most
just think he's
conservative
really showing his
Hispanics.
yes, and so I think he's just showing his true colors. Being honest with you, that's how I really see it. I really think he's just showing his true colors. So he just waited for the opportunity to be something really high up, which Secretary of State is one of the highest positions you can be in this country. And look, you know, he's taking advantage of it, and I just think that he's just fully embracing who he is.
Yeah, he was. His family were Marco Rubio. If you look him up, his family were associates of the Batista government. The Batista government was a dictatorship, an authoritarian, strongman, right wing government propped up by the U.S. before Fidel Castro and his communist revolution. So it makes sense that he would have some very strong anti left wing opinions for sure, and
Mm.
maybe. I mean, not trying to throw allegations against his character, not trying to throw any libel, but there's reason to assume or to believe that it's possible that he may have some authoritarian leanings himself, or may have been raised with some comfortability with just the idea of a strongman leader that's anti-communist to his core. Which Donald Trump is promoting himself a bit that way. He's anti-immigration, anti-terrorism, anti a lot of stuff. But first and foremost, the modern Republican Party sort of has defined itself as being the anti-communist party, especially as AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie
Mhm.
Sanders, some self-described socialists have taken rise in the Democratic Party and have become high-profile figures. There's been a real alignment of the Republican Party against that. They're anti-Antifa, anti-communism, anti-socialism. They've defined themselves as that, the pro-West, pro-capitalism, sort of that type of party, which makes sense that Marco Rubio would find himself perhaps even more entrenched in partisan politics now that it's sort of socialism versus everybody else. The Republicans, I guess, would it be how they would describe themselves and describe their views. And his family has real strong ties to anti-communist movements in the Americas.
Yeah.
On a slightly different note, just to offer a counter argument here, because I know that's one of the reasons our listeners come is because we try to explore the full range of topics that we specifically want to emphasize where it impacts young people. Bukele has been a very successful and popular leader in El Salvador. Say what you want about his closeness to Trump or his interactions with
Yeah.
right wing leaders here in the U.S., Bukele still to this day extremely popular for one, his tough on crime, lock up all the gang members efforts early in his career, and also for his adoption of tech, adoption of tourism as a vital industry for El Salvador, cleaning up the streets, reducing homelessness, creating more housing, and lowering the prices of groceries. He's increased subsidies for everyday needs for the average Salvadoran citizen, and he's really done a great job of reducing youth unemployment in El Salvador. So, as much as it seems like we may have been critical of him in this episode for his collaboration with Trump in these efforts to somewhat oppress people who are, well, to potentially set up to oppress people who are U.S. citizens or residents that go against this administration. As far as his domestic policies, I don't think there's really many complaints you can lodge against him if you're a youth activist or someone who is advocating for the rights and economic viability of the youth globally and in your country. So I do want to give him a shout out there. We are first and foremost a pro youth organization, a pro youth podcast. We are anti gerontocracy. We believe old people are running the world. We believe the baby boomer generation is driving a great civilizational decline in many ways. The least of which is the eroding of civil rights with the Patriot Act and now with the Trump administration's efforts. But as far as how it's going for Central Americans, with Claudia Sheinbaum, who has made a lot of efforts to reduce youth unemployment as a left wing leader, and Bukele, who is sort of coming out now as sort of the tech right leader, he's sort of established himself to look more like a right wing leader with his closeness to Trump, still a very pro youth leader. So if that's the one thing both sides of the aisle can agree on, I'm all for it if it's for advocating for the youth. It's not looking like, democracy and human rights are something they agree on, but hey, I'm for it. I'm for helping the youth economically if you're not doing anything else. Your thoughts, Ferris?
No, I'm with you. Like this is the main topic of this podcast is always like kind of like positive, put it positive and bring uplift the youth basically. And trying to kind of take down the older individuals who are kind of ruining this world for us and creating this world, making it unaffordable for us to be able to live. I'm with you on that.
Absolutely. If you want to do great things for the youth, not just in El Salvador, but in the U.S., Bukele, the one thing you could do is just say, whenever Trump says he's going to send you over some terrorists, some migrants, ask how old they are. Over 55, over 65, take them. We don't need them. Take them. Take those terrorists. But if he sends somebody who's in their 20s or their early 30s, all the way up to 40, I would say, hey, just tell Trump, hey, calm down. Let's give this guy due process. Let him get his day in court, maybe, before we send him over. But all the other ones, get him in the prison, please.
1000%.
All right. So we've come to an agreement there at least, and we've given you guys the information and the news for the day. As always, I do want to implore you to like, subscribe, and comment if you could. If you want to comment something today, I think a great prompt or a great interaction point for us would be, what do you think is the timeline that we're going to see the full slide into authoritarianism? As in, when do you think the general public will say, hey, democracy as it previously existed in the U.S. is over? I'm saying we'll see that before the end of this year, 2025. Ferris is saying we'll see that. He's giving it a broader range of saying before 4 years, he thinks the real turning point will be when Trump announces that he's going to run for a third term. He would have to announce that probably in 2027 or 2028. So that's his timeline. Are you guys on
Yeah.
my team, on Ferris's team, or somewhere in between? Do you think it'll happen before he announces his running, but after the end of this year? All right. And that's going to do it for today. Any final words, Ferris?
No, I'm saying everybody take it easy, be careful, and watch out. We got a long 4 years, and if it looks like it's just gonna get worse, and I'm probably more inclining to listening. I'm more inclining to what Chad is saying. So yeah,
All right. Well, we'll see you guys later. Hope you're still around by the time the next episode drops. Have a wonderful day.